Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Fateh Azzam. I'm the director of the newly established Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship here at AUB. This is one of our first activities. We had one other activity before that. And we're very, very pleased and very happy that the first topic we will be starting to talk about is Tunisian civil society. I'm very, very happy to be welcoming an old friend and a colleague in the human rights movement in the Arab region for a long time, Mr. Abdel-Basset Ben Hassen from Tunis. Abdel-Basset is currently the president of the Arab Institute for Human Rights. It's an institute that has been working since the mid-80s in human rights education, training, and promoting human rights across the Arab region. Abdel-Basset wears other hats as well. He is the chairman of the Tunisian National Committee for the support of refugees. And he's also been a member of the High Committee for the realization of the objectives of the revolution, political reform, and democratic transition. In this committee, Abdel-Basset participated in drafting the post-revolution legislation on freedoms of association, freedom of expression, assembly, and on elections. He was elected president of the Arab Institute in 2011, in March. But that's after 2 decades of experience in the field of human rights, as I had mentioned. He was also program officer for human rights with the Ford Foundation for the period 2005 to 2011. Abdel-Basset has taught human rights at the Faculty of Law and Political Science in Tunisia, the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Tunis, the International Institute for Human Rights in Strasbourg, France, and has written a good deal on human rights and human rights education and culture. He was a member of the drafting committee of the United Nations World Programme on Human Rights Education. He graduated from the Faculty of Law and Political Science in Tunis and holds a master's degree in political science. And the last hat that Abdel-Basset wears, which is probably his biggest hat, is that he's a poet. And he has published a number of volumes of poetry which has been translated into French, Italian, and German. Now, we're very happy to have Abdel-Basset because he's been part of the post-revolutionary era in Tunis since 2011 as an active member of civil society fighting to protect secular space, especially after the Ennahda party won the majority in the parliamentary elections after the revolution, the first parliamentary elections. So, as you can tell from his CV, from the short bio I explained, he's been very active, he's been very involved. And we posed the question to Abdel-Basset is, as part of our learning and knowledge building project at the Asfari Institute, how has civil society managed to protect secular space when we haven't seen the same happen in many other countries in the region? The idea that Tunis should be a civil state, Dawla Madaniya, and not have, for example, in the constitution, Sharia be a major source of legislation, or, as we have in many countries, the major source of legislation. So we asked Abdel-Basset if he would share with us some of the efforts and activities and strategies of civil society in Tunis during that immediate couple of years after the revolution, and to also give us a sense of what's going on today in terms of civil society work to preserve that secular space in Tunis. So once again, welcome Abdel-Basset. You have, let's say, we'll talk about 30, 40 minutes as you feel comfortable, and then we'll have an open discussion with Abdel-Basset.
Thank you, dear friend Fateh, and I'm grateful for Asfari for giving me the opportunity to speak for the first time in this very prestigious university, the AUB. To speak about a very complex, difficult, fragile, but exciting moment in the history of modern Tunisia, the transition. And to develop some ideas and some questions about the role of civil society in these transition processes. The revolution in this transition reintroduced the question of the role of civil society in the Tunisian modern history. But not only the questions about the role of civil society, it reintroduced a very old question about the relationship between civism and violence, between civic state and religious state, the duality between secular space and religious space, what we call in French, le profane et le sacré. This was, I think, a very important moment in our history to reintroduce these important questions and the historical processes of the development and the progress of our society. For the first time, it's not about theoretical discussions, debates, but it's about history. It's about history and movement. And I think that the question about the role of civil society also helped us to try to rewrite the role of civil society and of civism in our history. Because, in my view, the history of despotism was written, but the history of civism was not. And I think that the Tunisian example is a real moment for the other Arab countries to try to write the history of civism and then the history of freedom and the freedom experiences in the Arab history. In 1846, in Tunisia, the slavery was abolished as the second country in the world to abolish this crime against humanity in 1846. And the governor of Tunisia at that time, Ahmed Bey, when he wrote his decision about abolishing slavery, he said that we are abolishing slavery because of the dignity of every human being. This was one of the examples of a very long civic history of our country, Tunisia. And this civic history is explaining the nature of the slogans that were proclaimed in the beginning of the revolution, and I will talk more about the relationship between civism, history of civism, and the slogans, civic slogans of the revolution. This abolishing the slavery was not the only experience in trying to put the freedom demand into our history, but it's one of the episodes of many other civic actions, important actions in our history. The first trade union in Tunisia was founded in 1945. The first human rights organizations was founded in 1978. The first also women's rights organization, and many other civil society organizations. The polygamy was abolished in the beginning of the 50s, and a real investment was realized by the new government after independence in 1956 in education. I think in 1972 or 73, the government at that time dedicated, I think, 1/3 of its budget to the development of the new education policy. It's about, I think, a historical choice. And this can explain a little bit a kind of civism that was really remarkable in developing the slogans of the revolution. The history of civism in Tunisia, I think, influenced the nature of strategies of civil society organizations in Tunisia. I think that the civil society organizations in Tunisia are the inheritance of a deeply rooted civic culture in our history. The civil society before the revolution, as inheritance of this deeply rooted civic culture, I think realized three strategic realizations before the revolution. The first one was to introduce human rights and the democratic concepts as secular concepts, to introduce them into the cultural, political, and social discourse, starting from the 70s. And this, I think, was major achievement, because this discourse, this new human rights discourse, challenged the authoritarian political culture and social discourse. The second achievement was the development of the capacities of thousands of human rights defenders, men and women. And the third realization was to introduce the human rights culture into the education system. These are the three main strategic gains from the work of the civil society before the revolution. And I think that there were a kind of two influences, two important factors. The tradition, the civic tradition of Tunisia, and the strategic realizations of the civil society, I think, that influenced the nature of the slogans that were proclaimed during the revolution of January 2011. The four slogans were about dignity, freedom, equality, and justice. The Tunisian revolution was not about tribal or ideological or partisan slogans, it was about civic slogans. And because they were civic slogans, I think that the civil society played a major role aftermath of the revolution. This kind of very brief introduction to mention something very important, that the secular, the dialogue, and the conflict between the secular or the civic space and the religious space is old, but there were many civic and secular realizations before our revolution and in our history. And I think that this is time for civil society, for our research institutions, to try to build some knowledge about the history of freedom and the history of civism in our cultures and in our countries, not just to collect or to document these experiences, but to educate new generations on the experience of civism in our countries, because now we are not facing human rights violations in our countries. We are in a real battle between التوحش, the violence, and civism. We are in a real conflict between the culture of violence and the culture of civism. With all this inherited civic tradition, the revolution in Tunisia started. And I think that the revolution, as a process, as a historical process, I think at the same time opened the door to a lot of opportunities for our society, but at the same time opened the black box of fears, doubts, and real challenges. Let me, as an optimistic person, start by the opportunities. And they are very, very important for the work of civil society and also for the development of our future. The first opportunity is about the potential and the capacities that this historical moment, the declaration of the revolution, gave to our society. Women, young people are really now trying to express their demand for freedom. And they are experiencing every day the drive to put this freedom and to develop and to change their life using the very important tool of freedom. This is, I think, the main gain from the revolution. Freedom is an action. Second gain, it's about reintroducing the question about the nature of power in our society. And it's about changing the power relationships from the vertical relationship of al-wahid, the only, the one, to another relationship is about the horizontal power relationship. There is a real demand for participation in our countries from all social sectors, and mainly from people who have been marginalized from the political, social, cultural, and economic decision-making processes. The third main, I think, opportunity is about the civil society organizations and its role in developing proposals for the transition era. And we have now in Tunisia more than 15,000 organizations representing many social powers and interests trying to be part of the transition era. The fourth main opportunity is about bringing margins to the center, what I call bringing margins to the center of decision-making processes. I am talking about poor people, disabled people, women, young people, minorities, refugees. These people are now organized into in organizations, civil society organizations, but also their voices are heard now by the media and trying also to communicate their specific interests. These are some of the main opportunities. But at the same time, the revolution, like all revolutions, opened the black box of many problems and challenges. And this is natural. This is real in the nature of revolutions. Revolution is not a kind of continued, smooth process. It's about a really very complicated process. And people who lived in Tunisia in the last 4 years can really testimony about what is really, how revolution is really complicated and complex. The black box of problems were not being resolved for decades. It's about the relationship between secular space and religious space. This kind of debate that was really hidden by the authoritarian regime. The second big challenge was about violence. And now we are talking about also terrorism. The third problem is about regional inequalities, economic problems, the role of young people, the role of marginalized people, even some tribal problems in some regions in the country, many problems that really are asking or are trying to express the real fragile situation of Tunisia. This kind of relationship between opportunities and problems is the real situation of Tunisia after the revolution and starting in January 2011. In this situation, there were two options: to go to violence and to civil war to try to resolve these problems, to find some solutions for these problems, and this choice was done in some other Arab countries, or to deal with the crisis in a kind of peaceful way, try to use the crisis to develop a kind of new vision for the transition. And I think that Tunisia made the very difficult choice to go through the peaceful resolution of the crisis and try really to resolve the crisis peacefully. Resolving crisis peacefully is not the easiest way to resolve. For some people, violence is a very natural choice, and it's very easy choice for Tunisians. And I think because they have this kind of civic traditions, because they have a kind of strong civic movement, because they have educated people, because they invested in culture also, because they invested in some secular choices, and mainly in liberating women and developing the situation of youth and children. I think that the choice was really easier for Tunisia. It's not impossible to make the same choice in other countries, but I think that it was like a kind of easier choice for Tunisia. I don't have time really to develop or to inform you about all the details about the crisis that Tunisia went through in the last 4 years. But I will develop some, or I will make some remarks about 3 main crisis periods in the last 4 years. The first one from the revolution, the beginning of the revolution, and it ended by organizing the elections in October 2011, and this crisis moment for me was a kind of the foundation, the crisis for the foundation, or the consensus for the foundation, a thesis. The second moment, crisis moment, is about trying to keep peace and trying to avoid civil war. And the third moment of this crisis, or the third crisis, is about trying to build democracy. These are 3 moments, and I will go in details for every moment. Tunisia has made the choice of going from what we call the democratic legitimacy, based on the role of majority versus minority, to another kind of democracy that we can call the democracy of consensus. This is a very fragile concept, but it's a new concept, and this was the real concept that was used in the last 4 years, and I will explain this. The first moment was after the revolution. At the time, after the destruction of all the state institutions and the parliament, the dissolution of the parliament, Tunisia found a kind of consensus idea is to develop the High Council for the realizations of the revolution objectives, democratic transitions, and political reform. This is the name of the first institution that was in charge of the first transition. And the name is long, complicated, as the transition, as any democratic transition. Any democratic transition is complex, long, and is about also finding consensus. This body, because if you want to manage a crisis, in a kind of peaceful way, you need tools. For every crisis management, you need a tool. And this very creative body was a kind of creative consensus around two bodies. The first was the High Councils of the Revolution. These were formed by all the political parties and by young people, and they were the people representing all the regions in Tunisia, representing the revolution and the soul of the revolution. And there were another body composed by the government called the Experts Committee. And this Experts Committee was charged to write the laws, the new laws, and also to develop some bureaucratic new choices for the institutions, for the state institutions. They were in conflict, and after many negotiations between political parties, civil society organizations, they came to the idea to put the two bodies together and to create this very long body, and this body was in charge of developing a roadmap for the first transition and to avoid the real conflict between the state institutions and the revolution committees. This body was composed of 154 members. 60% of them were representing civil society organizations, trade unions, and experts. They did three main achievements. The first one was to write the 6 laws in Tunisia on media, on association, and they were very, very progressive laws. Second achievement was to put in place all the mechanisms to prepare the first democratic elections, and this was done. And the third one was to monitor the action of the new government. This body, because the 60% of its members was composed of civil society organizations and of human rights people, did this remarkable work and really give the Tunisia the possibility to peacefully manage the first very, very difficult transition moment. And the elections were organized and were monitored by this body, and the first transition moment was peacefully organized and managed. The second crisis moment, this I can name it as the research for peace, social peace. And it started after the elections. The Troika, composed of the Islamist party and 2 other secular parties, didn't succeed in managing the country. And after a lot of demonstrations, political crisis, 2 political killings were made. And this was a real important symbolic moment in our transition. The political crisis, some people tried to resolve it using the political killings. And political killings in Tunisia was really very, very new for Tunisian people. And people reacted to this by 2 choices. The first one was by demonstrations and by developing the idea that democratic legitimacy based on majority, elected majority, is not the solution for this transition, and that we need to go to consensus for the second time to find the solution for the political crisis. This was the main objective of the establishment of what we call the national dialogue. After the crisis, after the political killings, after the demonstrations, after the resistance of many civil society organizations against the trial of some political Islamist parties to impose on Tunisia Sharia in the constitution or to change equality in the constitution by complementarity, after a lot of demonstrations, after this political crisis, the civil society succeeded in bringing all the political parties to what we call the national dialogue. And the national dialogue, where all political parties were represented, tried to develop a kind of roadmap for the transition. The roadmap was developed, and the Islamist political party, with its allies, accepted to leave power. And a new government, technocrat government, was formed in Tunisia. And I think that the second important moment helped Tunisia really to avoid the civil war. Now we are in the third moment with the new constitution, and I will talk a little bit, I will finish by talking about the constitution. Now we are in the third moment. It's not a moment of crisis, and it's not a moment of democracy. It's a moment where all people are trying to find a kind of balance between the issues that I raised at the beginning of my talk. It's trying to find a kind of balance between the secular demand and the religious demand, trying to find a kind of common space where people can build their democratic transition. It's about trying to find the common space. This is about transition. Transition, peaceful transition, is about different people having different political, ideological views, trying through negotiations and through peaceful debates, trying to find a common ground where no one will consider himself as the winner or absolute winner and absolute part who will dominate the political, social, and cultural and ideological space. This is the real challenge for Tunisia. I think that we did some very important steps in finding the tools, the strategic tools, to develop this kind of crisis management, peaceful crisis management. We had the vision. The vision is to resolve a crisis peacefully and to go through a peaceful transition, democratic transition. This is the vision. The strategic tools were about negotiation, and the gains were about avoiding violence as a tool to resolve our problems. The Constitution, as an example, was the space for all what I just mentioned. The discussions and the debates about and the drafting process was the real mirror of all this kind of historical negotiations and historical consensus. The first draft of our constitution in June 2012. This draft constitutions, the Troika and the Islamist party tried to impose on Tunisia this first draft. And this first draft was very, very weak. Even if we compare this version with our first constitution in 1959. And through two strategic mobilization, I think we came to a very progressive constitution. It's not the ideal constitution, but it's a very progressive constitution. The first mobilization was through what we called the national dialogue. With the national dialogue, the political parties and the civil society developed or founded a kind of the consensus committee. The consensus committee was composed of representatives of the civil society organizations and the political parties and members of the Constitutional Assembly, the parliament. And all the contradictions or the problems in drafting the constitution were moved to this body called the Consensus Committee. The Consensus Committee negotiated all the problematic issues and then came to the General Assembly, the National Assembly, to adopt these problematic issues. This was the first tool, negotiation tool. The second negotiation tool was about an unbelievable mobilization of the civil society. Through, for example, the Tunisian Pact of Human Rights. This was a kind of document developed by the civil society to lobby the new constitution. And it was considered as a kind of the human rights declaration of the Tunisian Revolution. But many other groups lobbied the constitution, and they were composed of normal people, academics, civil society organizations, and they lobbied every article in the constitution. Every article was lobbied by a group of pressure from the civil society. For example, women's rights, right to education, right to water, right to food, right to housing. Some very important and powerful lobbies from the civil society were trying really to influence the drafting processes. I think this helped Tunisia to move to a kind of progressive constitution. I will end by saying that some lessons from this experience. The first lesson is that transitions are about negotiations. Negotiations are about vision and skills. And we need, for all our Arab societies, a new culture, the culture of negotiations and of historical compromises. This is the first main lesson. Historical compromises, negotiations is not about imposing something on someone, but it's about bringing people to a kind of common space. And this space is not religious, is not totally secular, it's about civism, it's about common interests. This is the first lesson. The second lesson, civil society organizations are not civil society or civism. They are part of the civic space, but they are not the only component of this civic space. We need to enlarge the freedom demand, the human rights demand, the democratic demand, to enlarge it to the whole society. And because of that, we know you need a new pedagogy. a new pedagogy for human rights and for democracy and for democratic transitions. The third lesson is that transition is a long process, but this process is mainly about bringing the real social forces to the civic work and the civic movement. It's about young people and it's about women. In our countries, there is a kind of demographic revolution. And this demographic revolution, and this is from our experience in our society, the young people and women protected the transition in Tunisia. We succeeded in achieving some gains in this transition because Tunisia tried to liberate women and because we have a new discourse, the young discourse. It's not only the discourse of young people, but it's a young discourse. It's a discourse that can really bring this kind of concepts, human rights, freedom, democracy, bring them to the real life. And through creative tools, and we saw this in many countries, and in Tunisia, we saw young people, and we saw new civil society organizations using arts, culture, media, using all these new tools, creative tools, to try to develop a kind of a new discourse and suggest a new discourse against the old discourse in our countries. The fourth and the last one is about political parties and civil society. Civil society in Tunisia, civil society organizations, I think that were supportive to the transition. I think achieved many important things for the transition because they were independent. This is very important, independent from the partisan discourse and practices. And second, because they took the lead. They took the lead when the country was going through a crisis. They took the lead. They were so creative to suggest solutions for the problems. And
thank you, Abdel-Basset, for this tour de force, actually, of Revolution 101 in Tunisia. How, the way you put together the historic and as well as the current political analysis of what's going on is very interesting. We're going to open the floor to questions and answers. I'm going to give myself the authority to ask the first couple of questions, and then we'll have some more questions. One is, in my mind, relates to the last point you made about civil society and political parties. Oftentimes, when we're talking about civil society, we get lost in definitions. People are asking, well, do you include trade unions? Do you include political parties? Or do you include only NGOs as organizations? So maybe you could shed some light on how, when you're talking about civil society in Tunisia, what are you talking about exactly? We know, for example, that the General Federation of Trade Unions in Tunisia played a huge part in the revolution and in preserving things as well. When you talk about civil society, are you including them as well? But then you made a distinction between the partisan political efforts versus civil society that's preserving an independent space from that. And secondly, if you would just mention one or two examples of quick mobilizations for civil society that were quite effective. And I would just remind you, in our earlier conversations before the event, you were mentioning how the first battle about refusing the concept of complementarity that women's role should be complementary to that of men, and insisting on the concept of equality, on full equality, and how that started that immediate spark of mobilization. It would be good to hear about that. But let's get a couple more questions from the floor first, and then continue. So please, go ahead. There's a microphone that's coming to you. Right
there. Thank you. I'll go straight into the question. I mean, the title of the seminar is about protecting secular space. So in a way, with your conclusion, I'm a bit confused now, because it seems to me that a secular space in a certain rigid and despotic definition existed prior to the revolt, intifada, revolution, call it what you want. And then there was the uprising, the revolution, and now we're talking about protecting a secular space, therefore against an onslaught by others who want to erode this space, which clearly are certain Islamic forces. So now, I mean, what I'm trying to understand is two things. Are you saying now that the way for Tunisia is to get some sort of a middle common ground, which is a compromise, and therefore, in a way, adopt some of the things that the Islamists are saying? That's one thing, and therefore, what are we protecting here? I need to be clear on that. The second thing, the role of civil society. Because civil society, as we all know, is not a homogeneous. Whatever we define it, if it is just NGOs or political parties, they represent, they reflect the realities and the political differences in the country, the social, etc. So, is there no battle between civil society also, rather than civil society against the state? So, I mean, this is all very interesting, because in other countries of the Arab world, we are hoping, looking forward for something else, which is building more secular space and not protecting secular space.
Thank you.
Yes. Abdel-Basset. This was really very intriguing in many ways. I think what really was amazing about it, you managed to go through a very theoretical, powerful way of thinking through a lot of these questions and making them very concrete on the ground, and having that dialogical relationship between what is on the ground and blurring it at the same time. And I think that is something very rare that we encounter, and I really enjoyed that part. And so I'll just say a few things that what I understood you were saying, and then I'll ask my question. So one thing you were trying to say, and maybe just to kind of comment on the previous question, is that you're not saying that this is a secular space. You're kind of trying to differentiate between what is civility, or a civic space, if you want to call it, and between a kind of a secularism that it could also be as authoritarian and as oppressive and repressive as a religious kind of regime. And I think that was a very important differentiation that we were making. The second part I thought was really kind of interesting that you were saying is that the civility notion is not really about necessarily just about organizations, and not about just kind of how many human rights laws that you have, but it's a form of an embodied question throughout history. It's a historically embodied practice that exists. So, and I find that analysis is fantastic. And as an anthropologist, this is really kind of a very interesting thing. So my two questions is that, is this make Tunisia as an exception? in the Arab world. Does that mean that basically that kind of historical conditioning was what allowed the Tunisian transition to be somewhat peaceful and civil? And how would you read something like what's happened in Egypt in relationship to what was going on in Tunisia? So that's one kind of question. The other aspect of this question is there is a militant aspect in Tunisia that there are a lot of people who are going to fight with Daesh who are from Tunisia. Actually, one of the majorities of people who are fighting with Daesh come from Tunisia. There's a lot of that kind of aspect. And what really was what was the kind of the process through which religious parties in Tunisia chose not to go into a kind of a much easier choice that you said, which is through, let's say, violence and militarization. So, or other groups. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that that's kind of only through the religious parties, but why were there no militia culture emerging in Tunisia like other places in the Middle East? So that kind of, I would like to.
Thank you. Let's go to Karim for that.
Thank you, and I think I don't know if it's working. Thank you, and thank you for an excellent presentation. Building on what Omar was saying, I was also intrigued by as I understood it, the point that the history of Tunisia and the civic tradition is what allowed for the democratic transition to avoid maybe the pitfalls of some of the other countries in the neighborhood. But the question I had was, you didn't, at least I didn't understand if you didn't mention more about the international aspects. So if we were talking about Syria or Libya or even Egypt, there was a huge international dimension, which perhaps, obviously diverted whatever potential or possibility was embodied in whatever those uprisings were. And of course, each country had a slightly different direction. But by the time you get to Syria, the kind of international, on all sides, the international dimension was massive, and Egypt later, and so I'm curious what the international dimension in Tunis was, or was it insignificant, or did it start off as something and then, in a sense, the national consensus defeated whatever international dimension was trying to change things apart? So I'd be interested in that response. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take one more here, and then we'll hear from Basset, and then do another.
So you said civil society groups are effective because they're independent of partisan political parties. The quartet particularly has received a lot of accusations that it was very much anti-Troika, pro-Tunisia alliance, Tunis, etc. As far as mediating the polarization between the Islamist current and the secularist current, do the Islamists, particularly the Salafis, do they view civil society as an impartial mediator?
We have lots of questions here.
The trade union, media, and NGOs are part of the civil society. There is a kind of debate about the political parties, if they are part of the civil society. But for me, I think that political parties are not part of the civil society. But there is a kind of debate on the different sub-political science schools about and theories about the political parties and their relationship with the civil society. Civil society is not civil society is the space, and NGOs are part of this space. Some of the NGOs are using the charity perspective. Some of them
are against democracy and human rights, and they are part of this space called civil society organization space. The democracy and human rights concepts are not the nature of civil society. It's a kind of qualification that civil society organizations can use. Some, for example, and this is a big debate in Tunisia now, because part of our civil society organizations, number of them are from charity perspectives, and they are combating civic ideas and the civic culture. For example, they are using education, parallel education system to destroy the secular and civic education in Tunisia. Some of them, some civil society organizations, they are financing some violent activities. I think that this real question now to develop about what is a civil society organization and what is the role of civil society in this very specific historical moment in Tunisia and in the other Arab countries. Because I think that the transitions in this very specific moment in our history is not reintroducing questions about political parties and about state institutions, but it's about also the identity of civil society space. In Tunisia, some charity organizations, and some of them are Islamist, played a very positive role, for example, in hosting the refugees. You know that after the revolution, 1,320,000 refugees came to Tunisia through the Libyan borders from 32 nationalities. And the civil society organizations in Tunisia and normal people organized their massive refugee aid. And part of this aid was organized by the Islamist organizations. Some Islamist organizations are using the civic space now to promote their ideas, but peacefully. They are not using violence to promote their ideas. I think that secular or non-secular movements now in Tunisia are going through a real historical change. There are conflicts and violent actions from some religious groups. We went through these violent actions in Tunisia, and we organized the resistance to this kind of violent speech and violent actions. This happened in Tunisia. But at the same time, and through this kind of conflict, negotiations, debates between secular and religious groups, there is a kind of margins of civism that this society is going through. It's not about real move to a secular state or a secular society, but there are some elements of building this kind of common space. It's a fragile space, very fragile, but because at the same time, in Tunisia, we have people who really want to impose on the society their very, very conservative ideologies, using violent actions, but also using terrorism. I am just trying to say that the old debate about secular and non-secular still exists. But the new thing is that it was introduced in historical processes. It's not just a kind of high level debates or kind of media or book debates. It's about historical actions. And I gave some example about, for example, the debate about the constitution. People, Islamist people, with secularist people, finding themselves in the same assembly, with the support of civil society and its lobbying actions, tried to find and to develop and to draft a document that can be shared by the maximum of Tunisians. This was a kind of historical exercise. My view is that Tunisia will succeed, and I hope other Arab countries will succeed. The day where they will use this kind of negotiations tools, of peaceful negotiations, to impose on all people the idea that the مصدر التشريع, the
source of legislation.
The source of legislation should be based on people. Second, that the representatives of people should be elected in a democratic way. Third thing, that the content of legislation should be based on freedom, human rights, and democratic principle. Fourth one, that violence is banned, and that all people agree on the idea that violence will be banned in the society. And the fifth one, that the main issue in the society is to protect women and minorities and other marginalized people. These are the kind of historical agreements that we should reach one day, someday in our countries, and this will be the kind that will protect us from despotism and from violence. Hmm? Hmm? ممكن
different opinions or cultural. It's a matter of either we have a civil life or we have a jihad and what is after. الصحوة الإسلامية
I will come to this. I think that the rise of this new culture of death, this new culture of killing, and here I am talking, for example, about Daesh. Okay. These people is not only using weapons to kill people. These people, they have not only strategies, they have a vision. They are recruited because some people, they give them a vision. It's a vision for life, but to go to death. This difference between a civic vision for life these people, when they go, and this is to respond to a question about Tunisian going to join this movement, because these movements are not only about arming people, giving weapons to people, and it's about giving them a reason for life when other political parties or other states or other organizations, they don't even try to give them something to use in their lives. This is one of the explanation to this issue. The second is that because of some governments, and here I'm talking about Tunisia, they made easier for these people to leave their countries and to join the armed groups in Libya or in Syria or even in Mali. At some moment in Tunisia, during 2 years, no control of borders, real serious control of borders. People were there coming to Tunisia to enroll these people, and a kind of market was open to use these fragile young people and to use them in this dirty war. I think that to respond to this phenomenon, I think that an investment in the civic culture, an investment in the peaceful resolution of conflicts of our countries, an investment in a new pedagogy based on human rights and democracy, in investing in trying to find some common ground with people, I think this will last. This will take a long time. This is very difficult investment, but we don't have a choice. We don't have choice. It's a common responsibility now for people on the political parties, on the civil society side, universities, schools, they should invest in education and invest in culture. And I think that, of course, they should also develop real proposals for economy. They should develop kind of opportunities to young people. But I think also that we need to give to young people a new vision for what is the society that we need to build. Is there any kind of conflict inside the civil society itself? I think that the conflict is everywhere. Now in Tunisia and in the Arab countries, the conflict is everywhere because the authoritarian regimes used the kind of the language and the practice to silence everything. It was very easy. Use police and use the propaganda to silence everything in our countries. Now, I think that, like I said, the black box is opened. And the internal conflicts within the society, but within the same social category or the same social power is opened now. And it will take a long time to find a kind of common language to put all these pieces into a kind of social vision to our society. It will take time. What will be our role? Try really to go through a process where we can put together the different fragmented pieces, or to put money, weapons, and ideological speeches and hatred speeches really to make the divide more divided. This is the real choices. And here, to respond to the question about is Tunisia an exception, it's not an exception. Tunisia is developing some experiences that can help people to develop their own experience on transition. Transition is about experiences. Transition is about something that I hate, is what we call models. I think it's about experiences. It's about really try to use ideas, to use real and life experiences. I think that Tunisia can help in this because we use it as Tunisians. We used experiences from, for example, when we started training people in Tunisia after the revolution about transitional justice, we used the experience from South Africa, from Latin America, but also we used the Moroccan experience. When we start to think about non-violence and non-violence, we used some experiences from Lebanon. The experiences of the beginning of the 2000s. There were some very important experiences. And I think that this transition is about learning, but learning from experiences. Tunisia is not an exception. Tunisia, at some moment, used maybe a kind of strategic tool. It's about negotiation. Had the organizations by chance, like the trade union, like Arab Institute, like the Tunisian League for Human Rights, the Tunisian Democratic Women Association, these people led the national dialogue. Also, Tunisia started the revolutions. And I think, fil ghafla, it's kind of
by accident.
By accident, the international and regional influence, I think, came, starting what happened in Libya. You remember that in the beginning in Tunisia, Egypt, and in Yemen, and specifically in Yemen, all the movements were civic, all the movements were peaceful. In Yemen, it was a kind of a daily festivity. Every day, in Bahrain, it was about civic slogans. It was about real people enjoying the sense of freedom, the sense of dignity. And came the regional and international geostrategic issues, I think, that influenced every country in a manner. And I think that some countries, the violence was imposed, I think, on our countries. Violence was imposed. Remember that in Yemen, in Libya, in Egypt, even if it was very weak, people tried elections. And elections were really democratic with all the problems that we saw. People started reading their constitutions. And in some constitutions, you will find very positive issues. People started, for example, to develop or to found something like the National Commission for Dialogue, the National Commission for Truth, etc. Something were starting to happen in these countries. And I think that because of many factors, I know we don't have time really to discuss this, I think that some people imposed on our countries violence. Of course, very fragile countries with a lot of antagonistic things happening inside the societies. And I think with all this, we went, in some Arab countries, we went through some very negative and violent situations. I don't think that this will last. I don't think that the demand of freedom, and here I am not really romantic, because I am really talking about something that happened in our countries. It's the desire of freedom. And there are many very deep changes happening in our countries. And I think this makes the role of civil society very decisive in this moment. If they will build on this new reality, or they will just leave the space for political parties, for tribal communities, or for international and regional superpowers. I think that this is the real question.
We should take one or two more questions, and maybe you can
about,
combine them
about
with this.
Egypt and.
Go ahead.
Before the question, just to say something. In Tunisia, they tried to impose violence on our society. I was talking about the role of civil society on trying to develop, to protect and develop the secular space and the civic space. But they tried in Tunisia to impose, some people tried to impose on Tunisia violence. But because of the resistance of civil society, they didn't succeed. It was a real resistance. Media, civil society organizations, young people, they resisted to many trials to impose violence on Tunisia. And maybe this also saved Tunisia for the moment, I hope.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I had more of a comment. So you focus too much on culture and the culture of dialogue and freedom and democracy and common language and finding common space. And it seems as if we are talking about this transition being a period of a clash of different cultures. Without really, you did not really mention anything about the structural transition, what has happened in terms of the economy. These political parties and the civil society are not, it's not just, I don't think it's just a matter of culture. It is many other things that are also into play. And I don't think it's also a coincidence that the trade union, the UGTT, played a major role. So where does this come into your talk? Is it just about a clash of culture, or is it more than just developing this? Also, this idea of civility or civism, I didn't really get what exactly it boils down to. Is it, so it's not secular, and it's not military, so it's not against the military, and it's not against the secular or the religious, is it democracy? And this idea of compromise, is this something that we can already start talking about? So I'm thinking about other revolutions, like Syria, so is compromise the only way forward, or is there rights that we have to defend as absolute rights?
Please.
Thank you very much. Building also on that question, I have two questions. One, I mean, the regimes in Tunisia throughout were all secular to a certain extent, and then, so that was protected, and then something made it sick. So it wasn't really just a secularism, it was also about certain inequalities. And where does inequality fall within that Islamic, secular, civil space? So maybe the Islamists are also targeting or using a discourse of equality that the other regimes did not protect. And my other question is actually about the civil society. So civil societies are very important, but I think the fact that we always emphasize on their depoliticization is a problem in the Arab world. So they are really left out of the political partisanship, and the politics play its roles, and then events move along where civil society stay in the background trying to bargain, trying to lobby, and trying to have this depoliticized aspect. And this depoliticized aspect was actually formed because they had to work under dictatorships. So we're also kind of giving the remedy to civil society to stay depoliticized, not to go into politicization, and stay within that realm that keeps them out of politics where things actually happen.
Let's just take one more here and.
Hi, my name is Ahmed, and basically I would be really grateful if you could tell us a bit about the Tunisian civil society in the pre-revolutionary period because I think it's really impressive how resilient the civil society has been, and how successful these various experiments have been. The Committee for Dialogue and the thing that preceded it, the safeguarding of the revolution, which is interesting because it is, from the little that I know, it's been smaller and much less powerful than its equivalents in, let's say, Lebanon or Egypt, and still it's been it's managed to produce results more in the post-revolutionary period. So, if you could tell us a bit about the incubation period. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm sorry, but first of all, thank you for the talk, but I still see some inconsistencies concerning civil society, whether it's an actor or a space. In order to clarify that, to me at least, can we define what is a political party? What constitutes a political party? Then maybe we can see if it should fit within that civil space or not. Because technically, a political party is an organization and actually a non-governmental organization. So if we could understand your point of view about political parties, then perhaps we can arrive to a consensus of whether such political parties are part of the civic space, civil society as a space, or not. Thank you.
Maybe I focused on the role of civil society in playing a new role. And I think that facilitating, being a space for negotiations to overcome the political crisis, I think that this was kind of space to deal with not only the political issues, but also to deal with many other economic and social issues. For example, the national debate led by the Tunisian NGOs was not only about the withdrawal with the end of the political ending the political crisis, but it was also about the social contract, and the social contract was passed between the trade union, the businessmen and businesswomen association, and the government, and was about economic and social rights, and about inequalities, and about economic issues. The dialogue was also about violence and terrorism, and about also inequalities between regions. I think that the political debate was not only in the transition about political issues, changing a government by another, but what was about initiating a kind of a new culture, the culture of negotiations. But in my talk, also I mentioned other, but I didn't have time really to spend on all the roles of civil society, but civil society in Tunisia, I said that it played a major role in drafting the new laws and when we've been part of this High Council for the Revolution. The civil society organizations played also an important role in protecting some human rights and freedoms. For example, in opposing some political parties to attack women's rights or children's rights or the freedom of expression. The civil society organizations also developed an important work on proposing some economic and social policies and things on the environment, for example, and also on promoting the citizenship culture through education activities. It's not about what you call the conflict of culture, but it's about trying to develop a new culture for the civil society work. This is the big difference. It's about developing a new culture for the civil society work. And part of it was by developing these negotiations and protecting rights in Tunisia. The compromise and defending rights. This was one of the main challenges for the civil society, part of the civil society in Tunisia. At the same time, you need to develop negotiation and to negotiate with some political parties that at the same time they are attacking some human rights. This was a true situation. The trade union was attacked by some conservative and fanatic groups. But at the same time, the trade union was one of the leaders of the national dialogue. We are in a so complex situation. Whereas at the same time, you cannot use only one strategic tool in this transition. In some moments, you need to stand and to be very strong in defending human rights and democratic issues. But at some moments, when you will see and you will realize that if you don't use your capacities as a space for dialogue to bring all people to the dialogue, you can lose everything because you will go through the civil war. And violence and civil war will make impossible all your work on protecting human rights, because with civil war and with violence, you will also lose all the spaces where human rights and freedom can be defended and promoted. This is the complex situation of Tunisia. We worked in the last 4 years in lobbying for the constitution, defending rights, promoting rights, going in all the villages and the rural areas to try to promote citizenship education. But at the same time, when we've been asked to be part of a political debate, not a partisan debate, there is a big difference between being partisan and having a political role, the political role in the sense of managing the city. It's having a say on the policies, having a say on the future of the country. I think that the civil society played this role. Why the civil society in Tunisia had the capacity to play this role? I think that it's not by coincidence, because, and I said this in the beginning of my talk, I said that because we have civic traditions, and because other factors. One of the main factors is about civil society organizations having membership. Membership. Organizations having members. They are deeply rooted in their societies. For example, the trade union in Tunisia, they have 800,000 members from different regions. And I think that this is a very important factor in helping the civil society to be deeply rooted in its community. Third thing is about resistance. Civil society during the last 10 years of Ben Ali's despotic regime, some civil society organizations, they resisted. They resisted to despotism, and also they worked inside, developed some networks to defend their right to work, and they developed some international, regional also solidarity. I think that this is one some factors that explain the civic culture, the membership aspect of these organizations, and also the way they resisted to despotism. And because they resisted to despotism, it gave them a kind of symbolic importance in the society. For example, the UGTT, the trade union, hosted many young people from different ideological and political they hosted them during the revolution. In the first day of the revolution, the trade union hosted many political parties, many people to, and this was also highly regarded by the Tunisian society. The question. Okay. Civism and secular. I think that civism is is larger than the word secular. Secular is part, I think, of the broader sense is civism. Civism is about tolerance. Civism is about democracy. Civism is about the rule of law. Civism is about equality. Civism is about social justice. And I think that secular movements, in a sense, were part of the struggle in our history to develop this kind of civism and made it a kind of rule for our society. The secular movements, and I don't want to go through this big debate, because at some moment in our history, secular was seen as against religion. Secular is against religion. And I think that the debate in the last 2 centuries about reforming, religious reform, was about trying to make religion part of the civic space, trying to make religion part of the development of the personality of people and not part of violating human rights or imposing authoritarian regimes and rules on people. And I think that this big confrontation, some big debate, sometimes it's about debate, sometimes it was about confrontation. In the last 2 decades, I think that led us to a situation where now we need really to rethink the relationship between the religious sphere and the secular sphere and try to find the common sphere where civism as the rule of law, as human rights, as democracy, as the respect of others, I think that this should be common to people who are secular and people who are saying that we are religious people. This is, I think, a kind of space where all people can live together. But to find this way, we need a lot of struggle to defend human rights, democracy, but we need to take any moment in our history to develop this kind of common space where people can sit together and try to find common ground for their lives. This conflict, this debate, this sometimes very tense relationship between, or duality between secular and religious will last. It will not end. It will sometimes produce very tragic situation where some of our young people are killing themselves. But I think I am really optimistic at the end that we will find a way where the religious will not be a factor of this, to destroy our societies, but it will be part of the culture of our society, a culture based on human rights and on democracy.
Well, thank you very, very much, Abdel-Basset. You've certainly given us a lot to consider and to think about, not only, and some lenses and angles with which to look at some of these issues going on, not only in Tunisia, but also in the region as a whole. Thank you all for coming, and see you again. Bye.